Albert Camus begins The Myth of Sisyphus in a voice that is almost blunt. There is no ceremonial entry, no reverent bow toward tradition. He does not begin by listing prior philosophers, and he does not pretend that philosophy is a polite academic pastime. Instead, he walks straight to what he calls the only truly serious question, whether life is worth living. If the answer is no, everything else collapses. Ethics, logic, metaphysics, aesthetics, these become decorations on a structure that has already fallen. Before asking how to live, one must decide whether living is justified at all. It is a shockingly direct opening, and it tells you something about Camus' seriousness. He is not interested in intellectual games. He is interested in the point where thought touches life. He is writing in the middle of a century that has witnessed catastrophe on a scale that makes easy optimism feel obscene. And yet, his argument is not simply historical. He's not merely saying that war makes people depressed. He is describing a tension he believes belongs to human consciousness itself, a tension modern life has made harder to ignore. Camus sees modernity as a time of disenchanted clarity. The old structures that once supplied meaning, religion, tradition, metaphysics, inherited moral frameworks, have weakened under the pressure of reason, skepticism, scientific knowledge, and historical trauma. The universe still functions, still obeys laws, still produces sunsets and seasons, but it does not explain itself. It does not speak. It does not provide a final why. It does not justify suffering, and it does not promise that justice will triumph in the end. Human beings, however, continue to ask. We continue to hunger for coherence. We want our lives to form a story that makes sense. We want our pain to be redeemed by purpose, our effort to lead somewhere, our sacrifices to matter beyond the moment. This desire is not merely cultural, it is embedded in consciousness. To be aware is to anticipate meaning. To think is to demand explanation. Even the simplest question, why did this happen, contains a longing for order. But the world answers with silence. Nature continues without intention. The sea does not care about grief. Time advances without moral direction. The universe does not reward virtue and punish vice in any reliable pattern. Death comes to the good and the cruel alike, and it does not come with a reason attached. In the confrontation between our longing and the world's silence, Camus locates what he calls the absurd. The absurd is not simply the idea that life is meaningless. It is not a doctrine to be believed. It is not a mood like sadness or despair. It is a relationship, a collision. It exists only when a human mind, hungry for meaning, faces a universe that does not answer. Without people, there is no absurd. Without the world's indifference, there is no absurd. It is born from their encounter. That distinction matters. Camus is not saying the universe is intrinsically absurd like a clownish joke. He is saying that the absurd arises when we demand something from reality, clarity, unity, purpose, and reality does not respond. The absurd is the gap between what we want and what we receive. It is the ache of a question that meets no reply. Camus suggests that most people do not live constantly in this awareness. The absurd is often hidden by routine. We wake up, we eat, we work, we talk, we sleep. Habit carries us forward. But there are moments when habit breaks and the absurd becomes visible. It might happen in grief, when someone's death makes the world feel suddenly unreasonable. It might happen in boredom, when the repetition of days reveals itself as endless. It might happen in a small moment of quiet, standing at a window, walking home alone, when one sees suddenly that life is moving forward without a guaranteed meaning behind it. Camus is careful here. He does not present the absurd as a final conclusion that explains everything. He presents it as an experience that comes from lucidity, from seeing clearly, without the comforting fog of assumptions. And once this lucidity arrives, it pushes us toward a question that can no longer be avoided. If life has no ultimate meaning, why live? This is why Camus begins with suicide. He says, in effect, if philosophy is honest, it must face the most extreme implication of absurdity. Suicide appears as a logical possibility, not simply as a psychological crisis, not merely as sadness or mental illness, but as a philosophical option. If existence has no meaning, if all efforts are ultimately erased by death, if the universe offers no justification, then what prevents a person from stepping out of life entirely? Camus does not treat this question with flippant superiority. He treats it with seriousness because he knows the thought is not rare. Many people, he implies, live with an unspoken sense of meaninglessness, and they continue largely out of habit. The decision to live is often made unconsciously. Camus forces it into consciousness. He demands that we face it. Yet his answer is not what many expect. He rejects suicide. But he rejects it without pretending to restore meaning. He does not say, life is secretly meaningful after all. He does not argue that suffering is redeemed by a divine plan. He does not offer a metaphysical consolation. Instead, he says that suicide is a misunderstanding of the absurd. To grasp his point, you have to remember what the absurd is: a relationship between the human longing for meaning and the world's silence. Suicide eliminates one side of the relationship. It destroys consciousness, and with it, the tension that produced the absurd in the first place. In that sense, suicide does not solve the absurd. It abolishes the problem by abolishing the person. It is not an answer, it is an exit. Camus sees suicide as a confession. It is an admission that the absurd has defeated us. It accepts that the lack of meaning makes life unlivable. It surrenders the confrontation. And Camus is not interested in surrender. His entire ethic begins with the refusal to flee, either by death or by illusion. But Camus has to confront another escape that is more socially acceptable than suicide: faith, transcendence, and philosophical systems that claim to overcome absurdity by positing a higher meaning beyond reason. He calls this philosophical suicide. It occurs when a thinker recognizes the absurd, the limits of reason, the silence of the universe, and then makes a leap beyond those limits into something that restores meaning. The leap might be religious faith. It might be metaphysical certainty. It might be an abstract system that claims to reconcile everything. But the pattern is the same. The absurd is acknowledged and then denied. Camus critiques thinkers like Kierkegaard, not because he hates religion as a personal matter, but because he believes the leap to faith is an abandonment of honesty. Kierkegaard sees the abyss, he sees the limits of rational meaning, and then he jumps into God. For Camus, this jump is not courage, it is refusal. It is the refusal to endure the absurd without appeal. To live without appeal is one of Camus' central ideas. It means living without calling to a higher court for meaning. It means refusing to say, this suffering is justified because it serves a divine plan. This injustice is acceptable because history will redeem it. This pain is necessary because it leads to ultimate progress. To live without appeal is to accept that there may be no final judgment that makes things right. It is to face life as it is. And this is where Camus' philosophy becomes demanding. Many people can accept that the universe is indifferent in theory, but to live without appeal requires giving up not only religious comfort, but also many secular forms of consolation. It requires giving up the fantasy that history guarantees moral progress. It requires giving up the belief that everything happens for a reason. It requires giving up the comforting promise that some future resolution will justify the present. Camus does not deny that these beliefs can comfort. He denies that they are honest. He insists on lucidity, on refusing comforting lies. So if suicide is rejected and transcendence is rejected, what remains? Camus' answer is revolt. Revolt for Camus is not a single act. It is not a political event. It is not a dramatic gesture. It is a constant posture of consciousness. It is the decision to live while knowing there is no ultimate meaning. It is the refusal to surrender to meaninglessness, not by inventing meaning, but by refusing to be crushed by its absence. Revolt means sustaining the tension of the absurd. It means living in the contradiction, longing for meaning while knowing the world will not provide it. Camus does not solve the absurd. He tells us to inhabit it. From Revolt, Camus draws freedom. If there is no divine plan, no eternal reward, no fixed destiny, then the individual is liberated from false hopes and false fears. There is no final court that will justify or condemn you in absolute terms. There is only the present and the finite span of life. This freedom is not the optimistic freedom of endless possibility. It is a severe freedom. It is freedom under a sentence of death, because Camus never forgets mortality. But it is precisely because death is certain that freedom becomes urgent. Without eternity, the present becomes everything. And from freedom, Camus draws passion. This is one of the places where Camus is often misunderstood. Some imagine that if life has no meaning, then Camus must be advocating nihilism, indifference, emptiness, despair. But Camus argues for the opposite, intensity. If life is not justified by a higher purpose, then one must live more, not less. One must live consciously, vividly, awake. Camus often frames this as a shift from quality to quantity, not quantity in the shallow sense of collecting experiences like trophies, but quantity in the sense of refusing to reduce life to a single meaning. If there is no final purpose, then life can be approached as a field of experiences: love, art, friendship, work, struggle, pleasure, grief, each valuable because it is lived, not because it contributes to an ultimate goal. To make this concrete, Camus offers examples of absurd heroes, not as moral ideals, but as figures who embody a way of living. He speaks of Don Juan, not as a romantic hero, but as someone who refuses the promise of eternal love. Don Juan does not seek a single final love that will complete him. He moves from one love to another, not because he is shallow, but because he refuses the lie that any one experience can become absolute. Don Juan lives in the present. He accepts the fleeting nature of desire. He does not pretend that love has to become eternal to be real. Camus speaks of the actor. The actor lives many lives in a short time. Each role is intense and temporary. When the play ends, the role disappears. The actor cannot hold on to the performance. Yet the performance is not meaningless. It is meaningful precisely as an event, as a lived intensity. The actor is a symbol of life without permanence and yet full of presence. Camus speaks of the conqueror, not necessarily a military conqueror, but the figure who acts in the world without believing that action will be eternally justified. The conqueror commits to projects, risks, and endeavors, knowing they will end. The value is not in eternal success, but in the act itself, in the energy of engagement. These figures illustrate Camus' central ethic. Do not seek eternal meaning, seek lucid life. But the culminating symbol of Camus' philosophy is not Don Juan or the actor or the conqueror, it is Sisyphus. Camus turns to the Greek myth as though it were a mirror held up to modern existence. Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to roll a massive stone up a mountain forever. Each time the stone nears the summit, it slips, falls, and crashes back down. Sisyphus must descend, take up the stone again, and repeat the task endlessly. It is difficult to imagine a clearer image of futility. There is no progress. There is no final achievement. There is only effort, repetition, and failure. And that is why Camus chooses this myth. It dramatizes the structure of the absurd, a human being exerting meaning-seeking effort in a world that refuses completion. Sisyphus is also a figure of punishment. In the traditional myth, he is condemned for defying the gods. There is an element of moral judgment, but Camus strips away much of that moral frame. He is not primarily interested in whether Sisyphus deserves punishment. He is interested in the shape of the punishment itself, because the punishment is, in a sense, the shape of human life. Many modern people live as if they are pushing a stone. They wake up, perform tasks, pursue goals, experience small victories, and then watch those victories dissolve. They repeat routines. They labor, they endure, they age, they die. The world does not guarantee that effort leads to meaning. Even success can feel strangely hollow. Even achievement does not answer the deeper question of why. But Camus does not present this as a reason for despair. He presents it as a condition to be confronted. The key moment in Camus' reading of the myth is not the ascent, it is the descent. After the stone falls, Sisyphus walks back down the mountain. In that moment, he is not straining against the weight. He is not distracted by effort. He is alone with consciousness. He sees the entire shape of his fate. He knows what awaits him. He knows it will never change. There is no hope that this time will be different. There is no hidden meaning in the repetition. There is only the task and the knowledge of the task. Camus calls this moment the hour of consciousness. It is the moment in which Sisyphus becomes fully lucid, and it is precisely here that Camus locates victory. The gods can control Sisyphus's labor, but they cannot control his inner response. They can impose the task, but they cannot force Sisyphus to interpret it as defeat. If Sisyphus sees his condition clearly and accepts it without hope, he deprives the gods of their ultimate power. The punishment remains, but it loses its metaphysical sting. This is one of Camus's most subtle claims, that acceptance can be a form of defiance. Not acceptance in the sense of resignation, not acceptance in the sense of saying it's fine or it doesn't matter, but acceptance in the sense of lucidity. Sisyphus refuses to lie to himself. He refuses to hope for release. He refuses to appeal to a higher meaning that will justify his suffering. And in doing so, he makes the task his own. When Camus says that Sisyphus's struggle is enough to fill a human heart, he is not romanticizing suffering. He is describing a transformation of relationship. If the absurd is a relationship between longing and silence, then revolt is the decision to remain in that relationship consciously, without escape. Sisyphus becomes the absurd hero because he knows and he continues. He is not saved. He is not redeemed. He is not rewarded. But he does not surrender. He does not flee into illusion. He does not abandon consciousness. He lives his fate fully. This is why Camus concludes with his famous line, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." This line is often misunderstood as a cheerful slogan. It is not. Camus is not saying Sisyphus is happy in a simple emotional sense, as though he smiles while suffering. He is not offering positivity. He is offering a paradox, that happiness is possible even without meaning, even without hope, even in repetition. Sisyphus's happiness is the happiness of lucidity. It is the calm that comes from refusing to lie. It is the freedom that comes from abandoning false hopes. It is the dignity that comes from owning one's condition, even when that condition is brutal. And this is where Camus' philosophy becomes deeply relevant to modern life. Many people live under the pressure of expectations that function like metaphysical promises. They believe their work must lead to ultimate fulfillment. They believe their relationships must provide final meaning. They believe their suffering must be redeemed by purpose. They believe history must be moving toward justice. They believe life must make sense in order to be worth living. Camus challenges this entire structure. He does not say, "There is no meaning, so nothing matters." He says, "Meaning is not guaranteed, and the demand for guaranteed meaning is a trap. It creates despair when life fails to meet it. The world will not justify itself. The universe will not answer, and yet life can still be lived fully, perhaps more fully, when one abandons the illusion that it must be justified. This is what revolt looks like in everyday existence. It is not heroic grand gestures. It is the choice to wake up and live without appeal. It is the refusal to surrender to emptiness. It is the decision to act, to love, to create, to endure, even when there is no final explanation. Camus does not offer consolation. He offers clarity. He does not promise redemption. He demands courage. The courage is not the courage of belief. It is the courage of lucidity. It is the courage to see the world as it is and to refuse both despair and illusion. In the Myth of Sisyphus, Camus ultimately asks us to accept a hard truth, that the universe may never answer our deepest questions. The silence may remain. Death may erase everything. Meaning may never arrive. But within that silence, something else can arise. A human dignity that does not depend on answers. A freedom that does not depend on eternity. A passion that does not require permanence. And perhaps, in that sense, Camus is not offering a philosophy of despair, but a philosophy of defiant life. Not because life is justified, but because it is lived. Not because the stone reaches the summit, but because the pushing continues. Not because the universe speaks, but because we remain awake. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because the world is kind, but because lucidity can be a form of triumph. Not because suffering is good, but because surrender is not inevitable. Not because meaning is found, but because life can be affirmed without it. And so the final image remains, the man descending the mountain, aware of his fate, returning to his stone. The gods have given him an endless task, but they have not taken his consciousness. The struggle is his. The mountain is his. The stone is his. And in that ownership, in that refusal to appeal, to escape, to surrender, Camus finds the strange, stubborn possibility of happiness.